Gene Wilder finally reveals what most fans never figured out about Blazing Saddles. There is a moment in Blazing Saddles that most people laugh right through without ever stopping to ask why it works. A washed-up gunslinger hangs upside down in a jail cell, half drunk, barely able to lift his head, and somehow that single image became one of the most beloved characters in comedy history. But almost nobody watching knows that the man who made that scene legendary was never supposed to be there at all. He got the part because another actor collapsed on the very first morning of filming, and what happened in the 24 hours after that collapse quietly changed the direction of the entire movie. This is the story fans have half heard in pieces for 50 years, but rarely get the full picture of, and once you know it, you will never watch the Waco Kid the same way again. Before Gene Wilder ever set foot on the set, the role of the Waco Kid belonged to someone else entirely, and it almost went to an even bigger name before that. Mel Brooks first wanted John Wayne to play the part, and Wayne actually turned it down, reportedly telling Brooks the material was too much for him, though he promised he would be first in line to see it once it was finished. Brooks then approached Dan Dailey, a song and dance man from an earlier era of Hollywood, who also passed because he found the script too crude for his taste. The role finally landed on Gig Young, a respected character actor who had won an Academy Award a few years earlier for They Shoot Horses, Don't They? On paper, Young made sense. He was older, weathered, and carried the kind of world-weary presence the character called for. What almost nobody realized at the time was that Young was a longtime alcoholic who had reportedly stopped drinking specifically to take the role, and the sudden withdrawal hit him hard the moment cameras started rolling. His very first scene was the character's introduction, hanging upside down in that jail cell bunk. Brooks would later describe watching Young start to shake and slur his words within minutes of starting, and it quickly became clear this was not a performance choice. An ambulance was called to the set, and Young was taken away. Production stopped cold on day one, with a lead role suddenly empty and a studio breathing down Brooks's neck. In a strange twist that fans rarely mention, the character Young had been cast to play was itself a burnt-out alcoholic, which meant a real medical crisis had unfolded while shooting a scene about the very thing causing it. With his film in jeopardy, Brooks did what he always did in a crisis. He called Gene Wilder. The two men already trusted each other completely, having made The Producers together a few years earlier, a film that had earned Wilder his first Academy Award nomination. According to Brooks, the phone call was short. He explained what had happened and asked Wilder to fly out immediately. There was no lengthy negotiation over money, no demand to read the full script first, just a friend agreeing to help another friend out of a genuine emergency. What makes this even more remarkable is something many retellings leave out entirely. At that exact moment, Brooks and Wilder were already deep in early conversations about an entirely different project, a horror comedy that would eventually become Young Frankenstein. Wilder put that conversation on hold, flew out, and by the following Monday he was in costume playing a character he had never rehearsed, stepping into a role that had derailed a production only days before. That kind of turnaround sounds almost too fast to work, and yet by the time the cameras rolled again there was no visible seam. Wilder did not simply memorize lines and hit his marks. He seemed to understand instantly what the role needed, and more importantly, what it did not need. In a film built entirely on chaos, noise, and characters constantly reaching for the biggest possible laugh, Wilder made a quiet decision that ran completely against the grain of everything happening around him. He chose to play the Waco Kid straight. This was not a small creative note. Brooks has said more than once that Wilder made this choice deliberately and held to it throughout filming. While Harvey Korman's Hedley Lamar sneered and postured, while Madeline Kahn turned her Marlene Dietrich parody up to full volume, and while the film piled sight gag on top of sight gag, Wilder underplayed nearly every line he was given. He did not wink at the camera. He did not exaggerate his reactions for effect. Instead, he let the character carry real exhaustion, real disappointment, the sense of a man who had simply run out of road. When the Waco Kid explains why his hand shakes too badly to draw a gun anymore, Wilder does not deliver it as a punchline waiting for a laugh. He delivers it like a confession, and the laugh arrives anyway, precisely because nobody asked for it. That contrast is really the secret fans tend to miss. Comedy usually works by escalation, one joke topping the last, energy building until it explodes. Wilder went the opposite direction. He gave the audience a still point in the middle of the storm, and that stillness is exactly what let everything else in the film feel as loud and unhinged as it was meant to be. Take away that calm center, and the anarchy around it risks becoming exhausting instead of exhilarating. Wilder's restraint is the frame that lets the picture inside it look as wild as it does. It is worth pausing here on a piece of the story fans often bring up but rarely get quite right, which is Richard Pryor's role in the film. Pryor was one of the credited writers on Blazing Saddles, brought in by Brooks specifically because of his sharp, fearless comic voice, and by Brooks's own account, Pryor was the person originally imagined in the role of Sheriff Bart. But Warner Brothers refused to insure him for the part, citing his arrest record and reputation at the time, and according to Brooks, no amount of arguing on his part could change the studio's mind. Rather than losing the project entirely, Pryor reportedly helped Brooks search for a replacement, and that search led them to Cleavon Little, a stage actor who ultimately made the role his own. Pryor's fingerprints remained all over the finished script regardless. Many of the film's sharpest and most uncomfortable jokes about racism trace back to him, even though he never appeared in the finished film. Wilder and Pryor would not share a screen together until Silver Streak 3 years later, the first of several films that paired them, but the seeds of that chemistry were arguably planted here, in a script Pryor helped shape from behind the scenes. None of this means the shoot was a smooth or entirely serious affair. By most accounts, the set of Blazing Saddles was as loose and unpredictable as the film itself, full of long days, studio anxiety, and Brooks pushing the material as far as he could get away with. What people close to the production have described as Wilder acting as something of a steadying presence amid that chaos, not through any grand gesture, but simply by being calm, prepared, and easy to work with in a production that had already lost one lead actor to a medical emergency before lunch on day one. Cast members have also spoken about how quickly Wilder and Cleavon Little became friends on set, with Wilder, who had far more film experience by that point, offering Little pointers on adjusting his stage-trained instincts for the camera. It was a small kindness, but it speaks to the same instinct that shaped his performance as the Waco Kid. An actor more interested in making the whole picture work than in making sure he personally stood out. The studio's nervousness around the film did not end with the Pryor casting decision either. Warner Brothers executives were uneasy about the language, the racial satire, and the sheer amount of material daring audiences to be offended, and when the film was first screened for studio staff, the reaction in the room was reportedly close to silence. Brooks has told the story of arranging a second screening for regular studio employees rather than executives, and it was that audience's uncontrolled laughter that finally convinced Warner Brothers to release the film as it was. It is a reminder of just how close Blazing Saddles came to being watered down or shelved entirely, and how much of its enduring power depends on nobody involved backing away from what made it dangerous in the first place. What is easy to forget watching the film today is that the entire Waco Kid performance we know almost did not exist. If Gig Young's health had held up even one more day, Gene Wilder is never in this movie, Young Frankenstein possibly develops on a completely different timeline, and the tone of one of the most quoted comedies ever made would have been shaped by an entirely different actor's instincts. Instead, an emergency phone call turned into one of the most quietly influential performances in comedy history, built on the idea that the funniest thing in the room can sometimes be the person who refuses to try to be funny at all. 50 years later, that choice is a big part of why Blazing Saddles still holds up when so much broad comedy from the same era has not aged nearly as well. The jokes people quote most today, the moron's line, the campfire scene, the sheer audacity of the satire, land as hard as they do partly because Wilder gave the audience someone steady to watch it all through. He is the character who seems to know exactly how absurd everything around him is, and reacts the way a real, tired, half-cynical man actually might. That perspective grounds the film just enough to keep it from spinning off into pure noise, and it is a big reason the movie was later selected for preservation by the Library of Congress as a work considered culturally and historically significant. So the next time you watch Blazing Saddles, pay attention to what Gene Wilder is not doing. Notice how little he moves, how rarely he raises his voice, how often he lets a pause do the work a punchline would normally do. That restraint was not an accident, and it was not the safe choice for an actor stepping into someone else's unfinished role with less than a weekend to prepare. It was a calculated risk that turned a production emergency into one of the most quietly brilliant performances of his career, and it is still working on audiences exactly the way he intended, whether they notice it or not. If this changed the way you look at one of your favorite comedies, Let us know in the comments what other film moments you think deserve a second look. And if you want more stories like this about the history hiding behind the movies you already know, stick around because there is a lot more where this came from.